Welcome to Inside Out, the Emotional Awareness Podcast, a Mentalus Academy production. Let's learn more about ourselves, inside and out.
So I'm going to start by introducing our podcast, Inside Out, the Emotional Awareness Podcast. We have with us today Angelo, and I'm going to let him introduce himself to us.
Yeah, of course. My name is Angelo. I live in Ottawa. I'm a young professional in my 30s. And obviously, I have a keen interest in mental health, but specifically on things that apply to professional life and career at my age. And yeah, excited to join the discussion.
Very good. On our end, I think that one of the reasons we started this podcast is because we assume that a lot of people out there have questions that are very similar to what you might have. And this is our way of trying to give some answers to that, but mainly just to have a really interesting discussion, because if you're thinking of these things, then there's probably a lot of people out there who are thinking the same thing too. And then Zin and I can bring our expertise to this matter and just see if we can shed some light on some of these issues.
Maybe it would be nice to remind that it's going to be you asking us questions, and we'll try to answer as much as we can. And of course, you picked the subject. So if you mind sharing that with us.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I think for today, I want to talk about imposter syndrome. I think I'm comfortable saying that I personally have faced that quite a bit already in my life in different contexts. And I don't know, maybe I've been teasing the questions that I'm going to ask, but not just professionally, but just in general, when it comes to just my self-identity. Maybe we can just dive right into it. I feel like imposter syndrome is one of those things that a lot of people know by name, and they know what it is, and they bring it up or they mention it in day-to-day conversations, but don't necessarily know exactly what it is. So I'm wondering if either of you would like to define what imposter syndrome is from like a mental health perspective.
Do you want to dive in, Edson, or shall I?
Go ahead. I'll add up.
Good. Imposter syndrome, it really depends on what the person themselves feels in the moment. So for some people, it could just be a mild discomfort in their role, like just to feel that, yes, I do this, but whether it's at work or personally, this is how I present to the world, but it's not exactly who I feel I am. So there's like a disconnect or cognitive dissonance between what they project to the world and who they feel they are internally. For other people, it can severely limit their lives because it can get to the point where they just feel blocked by that sensation, by that feeling, and they don't feel like they can move forward in whatever path they've chosen. Like with anything in terms of wellness or mental health, it really depends on the magnitude of it and how it affects your life. So I don't know if that's a definition. It's more like the scope.
I would add to that it's mostly related to self-doubt in terms of things or tasks we do or who we are, knowing that originally we are more than qualified to do whatever it is. So as Daniela said, it's an inner perception of self-doubt that we have of our knowledge or our performances.
I think it might also be tied to perfectionism in many ways, right? If the more perfectionistic you tend to be, the greater the likelihood that you feel this imposter syndrome. Because you just don't feel like you're living up to whatever it is that you think you should be living up to.
No, for sure. And I think that aligns with how I was thinking about it. I'm just curious from your perspective. I think we hear about it a lot, and I can say that personally, myself, my friends have at one time or another divulged that, oh, we feel that the positions we're at are too senior for our level. We don't match up with other people, and obviously it's often internal. But I don't necessarily think that we were always hearing about that. I don't think I ever picture my parents behaving in that way, or people from an older generation. Do you think there's something with like people that grow up or operate, particularly in a digital environment, that has a role to play there?
It's an interesting question.
Very interesting. I would say I don't think it's just related to digital. I think that people, our generation is a bit older than your generation. also experienced that, but I think it was in a different way. I think what is asked from us now is to be more performant. So this feeling can be presented more frequently. Also, how tasks are asked to be done can give that impression. I also think that people are taking, as you said, senior positions with younger ages, which also facilitate this feeling because what they've been asked, what they are required to do, the things they think they have to do, I think it can be sometimes overwhelming with that.
Mm.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think, Daniela.
I agree. I'm interested, Angelo, in what you said about the generational aspect of this. And what's your observation when it comes to that?
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel at least in a certain time period for a lot of people, so people that are currently like living in university or people that are in a more mid-level, any discussion you have at some point comes up as I don't know if I'm there yet. Maybe I think that other people don't think I'm there yet, which I think we can also talk about on how imposter syndrome can show as our perception what other people think of us. But I don't think I've ever heard like people who are of an older age, and maybe like a plausible scenario is that I wasn't there when they were in a more vulnerable stage in their life to be experiencing imposter syndrome. But I also don't know that you're ever not vulnerable to at some point feel like you're not enough. So I'm just curious why I wouldn't have experienced it with people that are maybe of an older age or a different generation.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that would be. And I think that maybe, Nedzin, you touched on this, that to say that at a certain point in your life, it's more prevalent or it's more obvious, if you will, or more on the surface. And then I don't know if it's that you get better at dealing with it or coping with it as you get older. But certainly in my experience, it's been something that's prevalent in all ages.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think also some like experiences that we might have or that people might have might allow this feeling to get. If I refer to immigration, if I refer to new positions or upgrading positions, those places, even if we know or we perceive ourselves as good enough, we are putting ourselves in an upscale, which might leave us in like questioning what do we know, how do we do it, are we okay in how we do it? So I think it allows that as well.
Yes, I think my next question stemming off of that is I was mentioning and thinking about it as I was asking the question. Obviously, we all have the experience, or the ones of us that have faced imposter syndrome in the past. Maybe not everybody has, but we all have the personal experience of what it feels like to be in that position and how we would deal with that internally. But I think one thing that I have noticed with myself, especially, is often there goes a long period where I'm picturing other people judging me for not being good enough for my position, whether it's professional or in another environment. And I'm later realizing that maybe it has nothing to do with what their perception is, or I'm finding out that they don't actually have that perception that I think they have, and that it actually is me reflecting my thoughts on them. And I'm wondering if you find that is a more subverse way of imposter syndrome expressing itself, or is it the same and it's just another way and it's not really any different than how you feel about it yourself often?
Mm. And that's an interesting question too. And in my experience, those two things are really tied together. I don't know how you feel about that, Nenzin, but this idea of you project that imposter syndrome feeling that you have onto the other person as if they're looking at you that way. And then it just exacerbates the imposter syndrome because now you feel like all eyes are on you kind of thing. I don't really think you can have one without the other. Meaning, I don't think you can have that sense of imposter syndrome without at the same time feeling that projection onto other people looking at you in that way. That being said, it's important what you just said, because at some point, if you do realize, if you come to the realization that it is coming from inside you, it's like those horror movies, the call is coming from inside the house. If you can get to that point, then half the battle is already won, because now you're actually aware that it is internal and not external. Where it becomes more problematic is if the person continues to feel that it actually is external, because then it's harder to be able to work through that, to say there's an extra step. In other words, first you have to understand that it is internal before you can work on it. What do you think, Nedza?
Yeah, exactly. The word projection, first thing that came to my mind is that it's really a perception, inner perception we have. And then what I think happens most of the time is we start looking for proofs. Is it
Yeah.
this is how it's happening? Do we check? But we've got to be selective, the proofs we're looking for. We are not objective to start with. We only see half of the truth, which kind of comforts us in this or not. I think, yes, as Daniela said, a big step is to start by acknowledging that it's from me. Because I think if it's coming from the outside, that's a different story, and that it's not the imposter system itself. I find it's mostly about going inside, how we look to validate this feeling, how it gives us anxiety, and we start building up on it. It's a cycle of self-doubt. We start working a lot to prove others saying the opposite, and then we get anxious about it, and then it goes into this loop.
Yeah, like, of course. And I mean, with that, it's the selective proof. So how do we know what evidence to trust and what to not? Because I don't think, like, for myself, I would say, oh, I'm just not going to pay attention to whatever other people may think about me, because I don't think that's possible. What are some tools where we can find out whether it's really us or something that's happening externally?
That can be tricky sometimes because, as you said before, even when we're given proof from the outside that it's not the case, if you're anxious about it, you're going to keep looking for confirmation that it is the case, that I really am an imposter. So sometimes that's really tricky and difficult to do. I think part of it is just becoming very aware of, you want to almost start to question yourself, be very Socratic about it, and start to ask yourself questions. Okay, so I think I'm not really qualified for this job, but yet, for example, all my performance reviews come back really great. Like, how do I reconcile that? So it's a little bit of self-questioning to say, okay. And the opposite can also be true. The other extreme of that is someone who is extremely narcissistic and doesn't see their own faults and sees everything as perfect and great and wonderful. Similarly, that person would also have to question themselves and say, wait a minute, is that really true? Am I seeing things correctly? It's much easier, believe it or not, for someone with imposter syndrome to question themselves than it is the other way around. Because if you think everything's perfect, like, why would you question it? But if you always think that somehow I'm not living up to this image that other people have of me, then it's easier to sit back and say, hold on a second, like, where's my proof? What are the corroborating facts to what I'm thinking? And that's where having someone else who's objective or knows you well or whatnot that you can talk to and confide in and say, okay, here's what I'm feeling. Here's what's going on out there. What do you think?
Yeah.
Because sometimes we do have blind spots. You're right. So you want to make sure you're not falling in that category either.
Totally agree, and respect also of what you said of isolation, because with this self-doubt and imposter syndrome, people sometimes get afraid to check around and see if I'm doing everything's okay, especially, I don't want to go into details, but not staying with this all the time. I find it's very important to be able to, okay, where am I in this in terms of what's happening around me? What I call the reality check. I know we're checking in inside, but there are also factors from the outside that can help us reflect neutrally that, yeah, if, as Daniela said, if all my reviews are well, it's something that makes me consider, okay, why am I thinking this within myself? So we use the outside to help us question what's happening, and we build on it. Sometimes intervention from outside can help us know why we're having this doubt, why we're considering all of this. That can be very helpful.
There's another thing we haven't touched upon yet, but I think is worth mentioning. It's the idea that sometimes this imposter syndrome feeling is really because we're not actually aligned with who we are. And that's a different subject. Like, that's more from the point of view that we're acting out a scene, but it doesn't feel congruent to ourselves. So that could also bring up this imposter syndrome feeling. It's not so much that we don't think we're good at what we do, but it's the fact that somehow we know that this isn't really where I should be in life. So what am I doing here? And it comes out as a form of imposter syndrome, almost as a way of protecting the self, right? It's a way of saying, if I do this and I tell myself I'm no good at it, maybe at some point I can conceive of doing something different. So there's that. It's a little bit more nuanced, but there's that in there too.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. I think I don't know. I think my experience of people that tend to have that feeling, it's often an expression of I don't want to say laziness, but in a way, the idea that it is somehow easier to make yourself smaller and to say, maybe I shouldn't be pursuing like a higher role. Maybe I shouldn't be putting myself out there in those bigger situations because I'm not good enough. So I'm just going to stick at what I'm doing right now, where I feel comfortable and not do the extra step. Is that something? And with that, I'm also curious, is there things that are often, are there issues, mental health concerns, the feelings people have that often couple with imposter syndrome and like work together to create those feelings?
It's certainly tied to issues of self-esteem. Because when you have low self-esteem, then it's harder to feel worthwhile. It's harder to feel like you have value in anything that you do. So there's a connection there. But there's something else that you said that I thought was really interesting as well. And that's the idea that it has a protective mechanism to it. So this is my personal opinion, and you don't have to share it, but I don't believe in laziness. I don't believe that laziness as a human condition exists. I think that when we witness laziness, there's usually a block, something it serves a purpose, a protective purpose. Because if you look at even the most basic form of life, like a single-celled organism, their basic drive in life is to survive. So everything they do, every movement they make, every ounce of energy they expend is meant to survive. If someone is not doing something, it's basically at the root because it's a survival mechanism. So whether that means protecting the little self-esteem they already have, for example, it may on the outside look like they're not putting in the effort, but there's usually a reason behind it. So that's where I think sometimes imposter syndrome serves that purpose. It's actually protective. It stops you from doing anything risky, if you will, that could lead to failure. It's not really laziness. Does that make sense to you, Nadine?
I totally agree with that. I totally agree with the form of protective mechanism we have, especially where we are in survival mode. People experience threat in own ways, and sometimes what is easy and comfortable for us is like very uncomfortable for other people. So if they've been through, let's say, trauma, hard life experiences, or sometimes just difficult childhood or growing up, just stepping out of the comfort zone is very threatening for them. So yes, they will stay in that place of comfort, and stepping up is very dangerous for them. So I agree with Daniela. There's not laziness. It depends on where they are, how they cope. It is maybe sabotage. It's how they perceive themselves, how comfortable and trustworthy of themselves they feel. But I would make a distinction between those two types of imposter syndrome. The one that kind of stops us from going somewhere, because I find the roots of this is different than when we go and we don't feel that we are good enough in that place. I would put them in different spots, same thing as we did before. For me, it's not totally, the manifestation might be the same, but I find one more important because it's stopping us from moving forward. It's disabling. So the other one, we're doing what we have to do, but we don't feel comfortable. We have self-doubt. We're anxious about it. So there is something moving. While I find the other one is, I don't want to say more primitive, but more conflictual. I don't know what you think about that, Daniela, but I made this.
I tend to agree with that because I think, one, you're doing it anyway, but it's uncomfortable, like you said, but you're still moving forward. It causes anxiety. Whereas the other one, it really blocks your life, like it stops you. So it feels like one is more, in psychological jargon, if you will, it's more neurotic, whereas the other one is more like debilitating and much more, like you said, primitive in a way.
I'm curious, as we're talking about it internally with other people, how do you think we can cope with imposter syndrome when we see it in other people, especially in a professional setting? And I guess there's the personal ways that this can manifest itself as well. But in a professional setting, if there's somebody that's more junior and you're trying to help them gain a more senior position and they don't seem willing, and I have a sort of sense from talking to them that they don't feel like they're worth it, is there a way to make that clear to them without making it worse? Because I feel like sometimes there's a risk that by really pressuring somebody to get away from the imposter syndrome, you almost might make them to recoil.
Nadine, I'll let you take the lead on that one.
Well, I was defending myself of saying they go to therapy to start with. But then it's okay. I'm curious why are you talking to helping other people? That just pops up. You can get back to that later. And why mentioning it to them would be pushing them backward instead of forward. I think there's how we say it. I think after all, it comes back to self-doubt, to anxiety, and to our internal perception. So I think it's how we address it in terms of those aspects that might help people see. I think when they know that it's coming from a place to move forward, I think it can be listened to. Yet I understand it can be sometimes touchy how to address it. But I was curious. For me, it goes with that to start. Self-doubt, anxiety, inner perception. I would go with that to start. I don't know
Yeah.
about you, Daniel.
I think you're correct, Angelo, in saying that sometimes when somebody is in that frame of mind, if you try and push, you can just actually make things worse. Like they can shut down or they can retreat further or whatnot. And as with anything in life, I think we're all like that. If there's something difficult that we're facing and someone's pushing us to do it, we all tend to react by putting on the brakes when it's difficult, when it's something that's difficult for us to do. That being said, I think there's room here. Like if you start from the premise that the person actually has the capacity within them to resolve this issue for themselves, that's when things like active listening come in, and you just want to be able to just ask a lot of open-ended questions of them to help them understand where this is coming from. And then one of two things can happen. Either they will talk themselves into it ultimately, or they will realize that they need help, that this is something that's causing a blockage in their life, and that maybe they do need to get therapy or get some help or coaching or whatever it is, because it's impeding them from moving forward. Now, we all want to fix. We want to fix ourselves. We want to fix other people. So the temptation is to say, look, you really are good at what you do, and look at everything you've accomplished. And if you just did this and this, like you could get a promotion or whatever it is. But that does tend to cause more anxiety and more fear. So it's a bit of a balancing act to try and help somebody. But it's a good thing to want to help them. It's just in the how, Ned's said.
I think also it goes back to what we started with. You see, the first step is being self-aware. So I think if you want to help somebody, they want to be open to that, but to get them to a point where they can see themselves that, oh, I'm doing this, without it being judgmental, without it being pushing and fixing. We've all tried that. It doesn't work. Nobody wants to be fixed by anybody, I think. I don't want to be fixed by anybody. But I think that this is how it can start, by getting them to this point of, well, yeah, maybe there's something here that is mine and all mine, not always from the outside. I think it can be a good point.
Always really difficult to watch someone we care about or someone that we have a lot of esteem for do this to themselves and just stand by. It's a good thing to want to help.
Yeah. No, I guess I'm thinking a bit in the sense of like when you get career advice, particularly in like a corporate space, we always get, and particularly in a junior manager sort of position, you always get the idea of, oh, you're closer to new people that are often most susceptible to things like imposter syndrome. So you're similar to them in age, you're similar to them in life experiences, so maybe you can just help them along. But sometimes it just seems it can potentially have more harm than good if it's not done in the right way, or if the person is really not open to it in that moment. They're just using your support as another expression of pressure and closeness.
Very true.
Hey everyone, we hope you are enjoying this podcast. Want to find out more about this topic and much more? Check out our courses at Mentalist Academy. Find out more at www.mentalistacademy.com. And now, back to our podcast.
And I think with that brings me to another question I had, which was, what about sort of personal relationships and life outside of work? Because I think we talk about imposter syndrome often, like especially in corporate positions. But I'm curious, when we talk about somebody who doesn't necessarily work in a corporate environment, or when you talk about somebody who's dating people, is there imposter syndrome in those situations, or is that something else?
Oh, I think imposter syndrome exists in all aspects of life. It could be dating, relationships, it could be even families where you feel like you've projected something. Like a classic example would be somebody who projects themselves in their family to be the perfect one, the one who always is there for everybody, who does everything, hosts all the family parties and whatever it could be. And then internally, though, feels like a real imposter, feels I'm playing this role, but it's really not how I feel, or it's not who I am, or I'm not good enough at it. I just had this big dinner party with the whole family invited, and my meal wasn't up to par, and decorating wasn't what I would like it to be. I mean, it's a bit of a silly example, but I think a lot of people can relate to that. So there is quite a bit. And depending on how much you identify with that role, like it could be earth-shattering for you to feel that way. Whereas somebody else would say, "Oh, it doesn't really matter to me, it's not that important." Similarly in relationships, somebody who goes into a relationship and pretends to be like always okay with everything, and deep down they really don't feel that way. They could also feel like they're an imposter too.
I say it's this impression that whatever I do is not good enough. So I'm not doing good enough for my partner. I'm not doing good enough for my host. I'm not doing good enough for my family. So it applies in the same way. And then again, we start pushing, doing more. Like Daniela said, if hosting a great party is this is where it's playing. So I'm going to go beyond just to do that. And at the end, I'm still going to feel, even if everybody tells me it was a great party, I'm just going to just look for what's missing. So it goes back to the same pattern. I find it's easier to spot at work. But yeah, as Daniela said, it can be once it's something we have, so we can have it in all aspects of our lives.
And the other piece of that, which we just touched on, is this idea of identity. Because I think imposter syndrome shows up most in that part of your life that is more deeply attached to your identity. So if your identity is focused on work and career, that's likely where it'll show up. If it's focused on throwing the best dinner party in the world, that's where it's most likely to show up, which doesn't mean it won't show up in many places at once. It might, but there's always one that's more prevalent, and that's because it's so tied to identity.
I would add to that because we are somehow wired to survive. So I think it shows up also, it might show up in all those spaces, but it might show up also in that particular spot where we feel the most vulnerable.
Absolutely.
So we need to compensate. So it might show up at work. And if at work we start to feel comfortable, everything the way, then it will show up in relationship, if it's a new relationship. So it's whenever we feel uncomfortable, this is where it's like, this is our way to accommodate ourselves to the situation.
Yeah. So I guess in a way, like it can almost metastasize. If the world around me decides that it wants to prove to me that really I'm good enough, and somehow something gets fixed without me really identifying that I ever had imposter syndrome. It's so obvious that I can no longer feel that way. Then it can just express itself somewhere else.
Yeah, that actually happens a lot in many different aspects of mental health and wellness, is that, you fix one thing, especially if you fix it superficially, you fix a symptom and the symptom shows up somewhere else. So whether that's between the mind and body, for example, is one way of looking at it, or from one aspect, let's take obsessional or compulsive behaviors. You superficially fix that compulsive behavior, but another one will show up someplace else. The same thing with imposter syndrome. Like, one obviously becomes something you can't argue anymore, so your mind finds a way to argue it elsewhere until the base issue is resolved.
And I find that's why when we are in transitions,
Yeah.
it's very bad for people, because it's like there's nothing stable, everything is shaky. So everything is vulnerable at the same time, and it gets to be exaggerated at all levels.
So with that, is there a way to cure, even though I know that's not a very good word when it comes to mental health, imposter syndrome? Is there one thing that seems to work for most people, or is it really distinct on a case-by-case basis? And I think I know the answer to this question a little
Let's
bit.
start by hearing your answer.
But no, like I think it's obvious that obviously we hear with mental health that it is a case-by-case basis for almost everybody, because there's no textbook of how something expresses itself. It can be different for every person. I'm just curious, because we do talk about a lot of common threads, self-confidence, or we're talking about self-esteem, we're talking about self-assurance. Are those things often sufficient to help us get over imposter syndrome in a more substantial way, or does it really depend?
I would say it does depend. It is case by case, as you said, but to me, the cornerstone is always self-awareness. Like, you can't work on self-esteem unless you have self-awareness that there is a self-esteem issue to begin with. And then from self-awareness comes the difficult work of rebuilding yourself from the ground up. That's the tough part. That's something that's very difficult to do on your own. That's where having someone else be able to help you through it and reflect back to you what's going on can be very useful. That being said, I also think that it's not a one size fits all, but even more than that, it's this idea that how do you build self-confidence, right? If not by starting to understand what it is that you're seeing versus what everybody else is seeing. I would hate for anybody to think that this is a fix that you can it's a lifelong process, really. And you're never going to get somebody who really feels like they're a complete imposter to never feel that way at all. There will always be some part of them that will be susceptible to feeling like an imposter again. But that's where you work at it and you learn to talk to yourself and work your way through it. So it is a process, and the process is different for everybody.
I agree. They get to manage this, I say. And I would say it makes it very hard because it depends on where it's coming from. As Daniela said, it's self-awareness. And the intensity of it depends on the root of it. If it's just because you are in a transitional position, but your self-confidence is already based, it's not the same as if you were brought up in a critical family where everything you were doing was critical. Yeah, I think it goes to self-awareness. It goes to who we are and how do we deal with everything.
So I guess one main last question from my end was, is there a way to protect yourself from imposter syndrome before it comes up? So if me as a person, as an example, know that I've faced it before, I'm aware that it has happened, but I'm really not confident that, and I guess in a way that's also imposter syndrome, but I'm really not confident that I can manage it next time, because I won't really realize, and by the time I realize, it will have affected me too much. Is there a way to protect yourselves from something before a moment of transition, before a vulnerable spot?
You see, it's the same way that everything transmitted horizontally. Once we start knowing and once we start to be aware of what's happening, that also gets to be everywhere. So we might not be sure that we can take care of it, but we know somehow that we have the tools, or we might have the tools, or at least we might know how to go get the tools. I would say that when you start on this path of self-awareness, it always also goes in all ways. This is my perception, how we take care of ourselves. I don't know what you were going to say, Daniel.
I was going to say something similar, which is the way I like to phrase it typically is that once you see something, you can't unsee it. So if you've gone through this process and you've actually worked through it, then the next time it happens again, it's like you've got an antidote already for it. Like you know where it is, you know where to go get it within yourself. Does it mean that it just disappears in 5 minutes? No. But what it means is that you've now seen what it is, and it's much more difficult to just fall into the same routine again or into the same trap, if you will, without already knowing, oh, I see where this is coming from. Again, this is my imposter syndrome.
You recognize the signs, you recognize the patterns. Once you get to know this, it's really hard not to see it. We can choose not to follow up on that. Yeah, but we do see it.
I think this was very interesting, and I think, I don't know, it would have been helpful to have the answers like at a different point, but I also think we don't necessarily want to hear them. Like, we're not as open to them, or we're not really understand that they apply to us, if I could put it that way, if we hear something at the moment we're not ready for it.
Yeah, readiness is a big part of it for sure.
Yeah. Those were all the questions I had, but
yeah, those were very pertinent questions. And I'm sure, like I said, I think a lot of people out there are struggling with this and have the exact same questions, if not more. It's a very good topic for discussion, to say the least. Angelo, how did it feel to ask us these questions? Was it pertinent for you? Because this is what it's all about. So we should probably ask you.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It felt all uncomfortable, to be honest, because admitting that we've had those feelings before almost creates a version of imposter syndrome, because why would you feel like an imposter if you are not one? That's the question that I think ourselves likes to ask us to protect us or sabotage us, whatever the case may be.
Right. So there was a certain level of discomfort in actually bringing this up.
I think so, but I also think it's easier when we talk about it when it comes to other people.
Yeah.
So maybe that's one way that this can be helpful to others. Or thinking about it, it doesn't really apply to me, but I'm interested in it from like an academic perspective almost.
I can say that I don't really know anybody who has a modicum of some form of modesty, let's put it that way, that hasn't at some point in some capacity felt a certain amount of imposter syndrome. Like with anything that's discussed in mental health or wellness, it's a question of degrees,
Yeah.
So when does something become a problem if it gets to the point where it's like severely impacting your life? Otherwise, I would be hard pressed to find somebody out there who hasn't felt a lack of confidence at some point in their career or in something they're doing, especially if it's new or it's a new promotion or new position. Similarly, which one amongst us hasn't felt anxious at some point or depressed or sad? Or these are all valid emotions that everybody has. So I think the fact that we can talk about these here, even in a general sense, I'm hoping personally that it will open it up so that people don't feel so isolated about it and feel like, you know what, everybody feels that way. So
I would start by thanking you to stepping up beyond your comfort zone. And I want to highlight the point, the readiness, because people sometimes hear lots of different things, but we only listen to what's important for us and what we are ready to hear. So I find you asking all those questions, maybe some people will listen to it, and then when they are ready, that will bring a bell in them and make them ask the right questions for themselves. So I really appreciate it.
yeah, I think it shows a lot of courage. So again, we just want to give you a quick thank you, Angelo, for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
See you next time. Find out more at www.mentalizeacademy.com